folks. We can have your attention. Just want to get a few things covered at the beginning. This is the announcement up on the screen. If you want to make a note of it. Larry Beecraft, who's handled a lot of income tax cases over the years, is having a seminar, one-day event on July 21 in Mesa. So if you're interested, make some notes on that. Since I got here this morning, and considering the IRS and income tax and so forth. In addition to that, to bring you up to date, let's see if I can find it here. It's over on this screen. Hard to do this now. All right, for those of you who have followed Thomas Costanzo's case, the sentencing will be on July 30th. There hasn't been a change to that. They had it set earlier and they asked for more time. So down here at the bottom, the last things that I found on Pacer are up here. There's an order, but the sentencing date is still the same. For those of you who wanted to attend that, you can go to courtcasedocs.com, and his case is listed at the top, and all the documents from Pacer I post, along with the transcripts of the trial. So if you'd like to read the transcripts, it costs quite a bit of money to get them, and I haven't received enough donations to cover it. So I paid over $3,000 for transcripts, but they're all up there. So if you want to read about it, it's there. Maybe the cryptocurrency will be worth enough eventually to cover it. But anyway, a lot of documents for this case, and you'll find other cases up there as well. But we have a couple of people who want to say a few words at the beginning. Pat had a few things to say, and this mic works, but we also got two wireless mics we can use, so if the mic's not working and you're speaking, just grab another one. I'll try to stay up here to adjust volumes.
Thank you. My name is Pat Schwinn. A lot of you folks know me. I've been coming to these meetings since right around 9/11. A couple of quick announcements. Last Monday, I rescued a little dog out of the parking lot of a grocery store. Needs a home. We already have 2 dogs. My wife doesn't want another dog. It weighs about 30 pounds. I say on my announcement here, 2025, it's 30 pounds. It's a pit bull mutt mix. It's wonderful. We've had it at the house now for almost a week. Lovable dog, great around people, great around other animals. So if you know anybody that needs a dog, you need a dog, small, lovable, 30 pounds. Let it go. The other announcement, I'll give you a little flyer. You can give me your email address, and I'll email you pictures. The other announcement is, I got a thing coming up on Tuesday. I go to trial on Tuesday. Results from a fight that I got in March the 18th of last year. It's a long story, I'm not going to get into it. The surveillance video showed this is at a Goodwill Industries store, South Scottsdale. Beautiful day, wonderful weather, broad daylight, 12 noon. Me and another gentleman had a few words. The surveillance tape clearly shows he attacked me. But there ain't a lot of justice in our justice system these days. I was accused of being an aggressor. The aggressor, I went to jail for a couple hours in Scottsdale. I went to trial in January. The other guy didn't show up. Case was dismissed, but they had 6 months window of opportunity to come back at me, and they did. So I go to trial on Tuesday. I'm facing charges of assault, disorderly conduct, property damage. I'm totally innocent, but that's the way it goes. I could go to jail for a while. So if you're interested in that, just being there would be great to have a little moral support. I'm going to be on trial in South Scottsdale Court, 1:30 p.m. Tuesday, that's the 10th of July. My name is Pat Schwinn, so if you're interested and you get to the court building, right at the south end of the building where they have the big schedule of the trials and what courtroom, just look for Schwinn, Pat, Schwind, almost like the play company. So, again, if you're interested, great to have some moral support. And if you need a lovely little dog, please let me know.
What's the address there?
Oh, I'm sorry. The South Scottsdale Court is at the Old Town Scottsdale Civic Center Plaza Complex where the library is. It's on the east side of Drinkwood Boulevard, just north of Osborne Road. At the northeast corner of Drinkwood and Osborne, there's a baseball stadium for spring baseball. Just north of that is the library, the police station, the court. If you have to go to court, they give you some address and it's a long way around the other way to get in there and you got to park in the heat. If you just go to the Scottsdale Library, you got covered parking, giant garage, you get to park in the shade. So don't park in the sun. Go to the South Scottsdale Library, parking garage, and then the court is just east of it. Any questions?
How old was the guy?
I'm sorry?
How old was the other person?
The other guy was 5 years younger than me, and according to the police report, 5 inches taller, about 50 pounds heavier. But that information is old. But the police report said that I was 5'6" and 150 pounds. I haven't been 5'6" since I got out of high school, and I weigh 130 pounds. So his information could have also been bad. I don't think he's 5'8", he's probably 5'6", 5'7". 185 pounds is probably correct. So, Russ.
What will go into that?
It's a long story, but if you go to a Goodwill store, they usually have 2 parking spaces for pickup and delivery, pickup and drop-off of any items that cannot be carried in or carried out in your anyway. So I was there to pick up a new Stairmaster I had purchased a few days earlier. I needed one of those 2 spots. This gentleman took up both the spots that are diagonal. I asked him very nicely to move. He got very rude, profane. Things degenerated from there, and a couple minutes later he attacked me. Yes, sir.
When the police made their report, and then were the first of all witnesses that saw someone, and number 2, did they take photographs of any residual marks on your body and the other person's body?
Great question. Before the police ever ascertained that there were no witnesses to the start of the fight, before they ever saw the surveillance video which showed the man attacking me, before they ever interviewed me, they interviewed the other guy. Based on that solely, they said I was the aggressor, despite all the evidence to the contrary.
But no residual marks, any residual marks on you or the other person, any?
We both bleeding just slightly, okay? Not from punches. It's a long story, but I got a bump on my elbow from hitting the wall or a pole, and he had a little blood, I think, on his lip, but it wasn't from a punch. It was because he had a pretty bad choke for probably about 25, 30 seconds. I thought, man, this is tough. I'm going to need some help here. But he was in horrible shape, and it's a warm day, like in the 90s, and frankly, because the fact that he was sweating like a pig and breathing like a locomotive, I was slowly extricating myself from this hole when the fight got broke up by a couple of employees.
But did the police take any pictures of your body and his body?
They have, when filmed, they have us on film. But by the time they did the film, the interviews with us from the body cams, the blood was all gone. And I just wiped it off. I had to put a band-aid, I carry band-aids with me on a regular basis in my wallet because you never know what's going to happen. So I had one of the Goodwill employees put a little band-aid on a little mark right there, a little bleeding. That was it.
The normal liberalism here, but what race were they?
What race?
I don't question.
He was a white guy like me. Any other questions? Keith, my man. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Pat. Jose, you want to say a few words?
This just has to do with the ballot measures. As you probably know, the deadline for submitting signatures was the 5th. So some made it, some didn't. Right now we have 3 measures that are for sure going to be on the ballot. They have been determined to be on the ballot. The 4 that were submitted by the 5th have to be, if there's any challenge or if there's any question or whatever, they may or may not be, but most likely all 4 will be on the ballot in November. Now, why do we talk about this now when it's going to be in ballot in November? You have plenty of time between now and then to decide how to vote on this thing. Well, the reason is that you may want to express an opinion in favor or against these measures. And the deadline for submitting, now, let me back up a little bit. You can, as a citizen, you can submit an argument pro or con regarding these ballot measures, and those statements will be included in the information pamphlet that goes to the voters. Okay, that's going to happen in November, but the deadline to submit those comments would be the 11th, which would be Wednesday. So if you want to submit any opinions, that will be included in the pamphlet. Now, you should be talking to friends, relatives, neighbors, whatever, about these measures, what you like, what you don't like. But if you want to reach a whole bunch of people, the best place to do it is to put those comments in the information pamphlet. There's one problem, though, is that even though it is a part of free speech, it's not free. In order to submit an argument, you have to pay $75. That's the fee for expressing your opinion on the information pamphlet. But if you want to do something with that, send me, and you're not sure exactly what to say or whatever, send me an email and I will send you talking points on the measures and whatever else information you need. Just send me an email, and the email address is, does anybody want to know the email address? Is anybody interested in this? Apparently nobody. Oh, okay. Folks, there's 2 ways that you make law in Arizona. Okay, one is the legislature, and the other one is the citizens via this. And some of these laws are going to be with us forever and ever. So it would be a good idea if you promote your opinion one way or the other, because then don't bitch about it when it happens. All right. So if anybody wants to have that kind of information, talking points, and all the information like these, the text it out, all this other stuff, send me an email at joseb4538@gmail.com.
I have a comment to make rather than a question here. I think Mr. Bennett would be extremely interested to hear this. On 3 separate occasions, I filed an objection or an answer, an opposition on 3 separate dates, 3 separate elections on bond override issues for the Scottsdale Unified School District. And I had to mail those down to this county superintendent's office. And the first 2 times, they did not publish my letter. So the 3rd time, this is how crooked and rigged system it is, I went in person to the Maricopa County Superintendent's office. I said, this is my opposition school bond issue. Please receipt it, give me a receipt. And they stamped it, gave a receipt. And guess what the last publicity statement said in November of 2006? They lied again. They said there was no letters in opposition to the override issue. They lied. This is a rigged, crooked system.
Okay.
In person, I've taken it down in person, and there's no question. And then I complained to the Arizona State Attorney General's office to look into it. They said they found nothing wrong. So this is a rigged system that we have in Arizona. What I'm saying to you folks, ask not what you can do for your country, but ask rather what these perverts and these guys government doing to you? That's the only conclusion
It
you
was
draw.
not my intention to have a discussion on this. It was my intention to give you information as to how you can get information in case you do want to express an opinion. I know I'm going to express mine, and if it doesn't show up, then I'm going to complain about it as well. But again, if you have an opinion on this and you're not sure about the talking points, you're not sure who to contact, you're not sure how to do it, all that information is available right now, but it's difficult to find. So,
Did you say that you have to pay $75 to submit an opinion and they lie and say that nobody did?
well, no, he's talking about a different case. He's talking about one issue which has nothing to do with this. This is a ballot initiative or a ballot measure.
Where did the 75 come in?
The 75 is paid to the Secretary of State.
So you submit that in order to put in your complaint?
Well, either favor or against. You can do either way.
But I think it has to do with the state question or a county.
What we're talking about here is state. This is stuff that has been put on the ballot either by the legislature or by the citizens. And it's going to be a vote on it in November. And what you can do between now and then, prior to the 11th, you can send your opinion and say, okay, I'm opposed to this, or I am in favor of this. And in order to do that, you go online. Actually, there's a 300-word limit. I didn't really intend to get into all the details. I only wanted to let you know that's happening so that I can send you an email with all the details if you're interested in doing this.
If they're accepting money for whatever you're saying to submit, that's fraud, that's easily, to me, easily identified and.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I'm just giving you the information in case you want to do something with it. Thank you.
It's a little introduction for Ken Bennett. He's the Republican candidate for Arizona governor. See if I can get this to work. There we go. There we are. Devoted family man. He lives his family values. He's been married for over 36 years. Together, 3 grown children and 4 grandchildren. And he's an Eagle Scout and a former Scoutmaster. Arizona native, born in Tucson, grew up in Prescott, Arizona State University, as did I, probably a few others in this room. Other than serving a couple of years as a missionary in southern Japan, he lives his entire life in the Grand Canyon State. He knows Arizona, its issues, and its people. Small businessman, job creator. He knows what it means to run a business. Served as chairman of the board and a number of companies we can go through, but I don't want to take too much time in the introduction. Public servant, 30 years, invested in the people of Arizona, half his life working for Arizona. He's the president of Prescott City Council, Prescott Chamber of Commerce, Arizona State Board of Education, Arizona Charter Schools Board, Arizona Historical Advisory Commission, State Senate, and Secretary of State. So please welcome Ken Bennett to the Arizona Breakfast Club.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you this morning. I am Ken Bennett. You got a little bit of my background there. I'm running for governor in the state of Arizona, and I'm running because the truth matters. And in some very critical areas, we're not being told the truth. We've been told, for example, over the last 4 years that our state budget is balanced, and yet in the last 4 years, the total debt of the state of Arizona has gone up by $1 billion. So if your debts are going up, I don't think your budgets are balanced. We were told that the last budget that was just passed did not include any accounting tricks and gimmicks or any tax increases, and yet it included both. There was a tax increase on our vehicle license taxes, almost $100 million this year and another almost $100 million next year. There's all kinds of accounting tricks and gimmicks where they're taking money out of one place to pay for things in another place. I know these things because I served, as it said there, in the state Senate for 8 years, but I was president of the Arizona State Senate for 4 years. And I worked very closely on establishing the state budget during my 4 years as Senate president. we actually had a budget from the previous year that was not, we had a budget. We balanced 5 state budgets each of the 4 years that I was president of the Arizona Senate without raising taxes and without using accounting tricks and gimmicks. In fact, we eliminated a lot of the accounting tricks and gimmicks that both parties had used for decades. We also did the largest tax cut during those 4 years as Senate President in the history of the state at that time. We also put more new money into K-12 education during those 4 years than any other 4 years in the history of the state. And we also rebuilt the state savings account. We call it the Rainy Day Fund. When I became president of the Senate in 2003, the state Rainy Day Fund or savings account had $13 million in it. When I finished 4 years later as Senate President, it had over $1.1 billion in the state's Rainy Day Fund account. So I'm a conservative Republican. I have a lot of libertarian in me, though. I believe in limited government and lower government. We've also been told some other things. We were told that if we would pass a proposition a couple years ago, Prop 123, which takes more money out of the state trust lands, that was going to provide all this new money for education, and most of it would go to teachers. Neither of those things happened. We were also promised that they would not take any money out of the principal or the corpus of the trust fund, and yet in the very first year after Prop 123 passed, and Governor Ducey was the champion of that proposition, the first year after Prop 123 passed, they took $170 million out of the principal of the trust fund. And I know Archie's here with us, and he knows more about the state trust lands than just about anybody in the state. So if I get to be governor, he might be one of my key advisors on the trust lands. So now there's other things that I think people need to know. I qualified to get my name on the ballot by turning in almost 8,000 signatures that we collected in a matter of about 4 or 5 weeks. The Governor Ducey and his campaign worked very hard to try to keep us from doing that, but we did so. But when I was driving down from my home city of Prescott, I was hearing these radio stories about kind of an agreement or a deal between the McCains and Governor Ducey, and if Senator McCain was not able to fulfill his term, the reports were that Governor Ducey was going to appoint Cindy McCain to replace John as our U.S. Senator. So the day after I filed our petitions, I tweeted out that if I'm governor of Arizona, I promise not to appoint Cindy McCain to replace John McCain as our U.S. Senator. Now, I did not do that out of any personal disrespect or anything for the McCains. I just don't believe that U.S. Senate seats are family heirlooms that are supposed to be passed from one family member to another. I also don't believe that the governor should be appointing somebody who does exactly opposite of what they said they were going to do just a year previously. In 2016, when Senator McCain was running for re-election, he ran as leading the fight to repeal Obamacare. That was in November of 2016. A year and 1 month later, in December of 2017, when he had the opportunity to be the deciding vote on the floor of the U.S. Senate to repeal Obamacare, he did the famous thumbs down. But for several weeks before that and after that, he told us that he was going to vote the way the governor of his state asked him to vote. And that's Doug Ducey. So we have Obamacare still today because Governor Ducey asked John McCain to vote against the repeal of Obamacare. I believe Obamacare will eventually bankrupt us as a country and is killing jobs and hurting small businesses. So I will not appoint somebody to the U.S. Senate, even if it's the current senator's wife, who would also vote the same way. I am a conservative Republican, but I'm also one that can get things done. And during the 4 years I was president of the Senate, I worked with a Democrat governor. Janet Napolitano was the governor during the 4 years that I was Senate president. But we, as I said, we figured out how to balance the state budget 4 years in a row. We did tax cuts. We put more money into education. We rebuilt the Rainy Day Fund. So it's a matter of sticking to your principles and working through those issues. Let me talk about some other issues that I think are important. I believe very strongly that we need to secure our border. I believe that the If we need to build the wall, I believe we do need to build the wall, the fence, whatever it takes to secure our border. I believe that as governor, if I have the opportunity to be governor, I will send the National Guard to the border to help secure the border. But unlike Governor Ducey, the terms of engagement, when a governor sends the National Guard to do something, they write out terms of engagement of what the National Guard can and can't do. I'm informed that the terms of engagement that the National Guard has right now are so limited and that they are almost completely ineffective. So if I'm governor, I will use the National Guard to help secure the border. I believe the principles of being good neighbors between countries are the same principles as being good neighbors on a street. A lot of people have fences or walls between their property and their neighbor's property. That's not because they don't like their neighbor, it's just because they want to control their property and be safe in their own property. A good neighbor calls ahead if they want to visit your home. They come to your front door, they ring the doorbell, you welcome them in, you watch TV or have dinner or eat or whatever you do, and then they go back out the front door and go home. A good neighbor doesn't hop over your backyard fence, break into your garage and live out of the freezer. Nor do they drop off their children on your front porch and expect you to take care of them. So the principles of being a good neighbor in a country are the same principles we need to use as though we were neighbors on a street. So we need to secure our border, and if you want to come into our country, you come in the front door. I also am very concerned with, I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I was very concerned about Governor Ducey's school safety plan. His school safety plan was very much focused on taking guns away from people. My school safety plan would be to put guns where they can actually protect our students. If elected governor, I will immediately call together a task force that will review all of the things related to how we keep our schools safe. How do we design the facilities? How do we put law enforcement in when there's a threat? How do we do the kinds of things, get experts on responding to emergencies, responding to medical crisis. You know, some of the emergencies can be man-made, some can be natural disasters. The critical one that we're all focused on now because of these school shootings is the worst case scenario when there's a shooter. I believe we need to pattern, I will ask that task force to pattern their recommendations for keeping schools safe in Arizona after what's called the FASTER program that came out of Ohio. FASTER stands for Faculty, Administrators, Safety Training, and Emergency Response. The FASTER program basically trains people in our school staff, teachers, administrators, janitors, anybody, on how to respond to an armed crisis, how to respond to emergency medical situations, crisis management, and for those that are willing, it's not a mandatory thing, but those school personnel that are willing, capable, and competent to actually carry a concealed weapon, that they can do so in a school. Now, no one would have to do so if they don't feel like they want to, but the best way to stop a bad person with a gun is to have one or two good people with guns right there when you need them. So I will not support the plan like Governor Ducey had, which was basically taking guns away from people. Yes, there are aspects of mental health issues and things like that that we need to address with some of our young people and identifying those. There's some counties that have come up with very good programs right here in Arizona as to how to identify when a student is starting to show the leanings towards doing something like that. And so we will, of course, try to identify every opportunity we can to prevent a shooting, but our focus needs to be on being able to respond in a worst-case scenario. The average school shooting takes about 12 minutes. The average response time by the time the emergency response people are ready to enter the school is 16 or 18 minutes. So we need weapons where they can protect our schools, carried by willing, competent. You know, we've got a lot of people in our schools that might be former military, former law enforcement, or have had specific training personally in carrying and using a firearm. I am also concerned about these accounting tricks and gimmicks. and raising taxes. I did get a question over here before we started. I do not support raising taxes. There's a newspaper article going around that says I do. That is not true. I never raised taxes during the 8 years that I was a state senator and 4 years was president of the Senate. I do think we could look at some tax reform, some restructuring of our tax system so that it flows with the economic cycle instead of going too high in the good years and too high in the bad years. Right now we have a pretty high sales tax on some things and not on others. If we lowered the rate and kind of had a broader base, we would collect the same amount of taxes, but it would flow with the economic cycles instead of going too high in the good years and then too low in the bad years. I believe that it's time to turn Arizona in a direction that is respectful to the taxpayers and grows our economy. The governor, this whole Red for Ed thing, I think, was very indicative. We need strong, steady leadership in the state of Arizona, not a leader that panics and caves into the crisis of the moment. For several months earlier this year, Governor Ducey told us that the state could not afford to just give a 20% raise to every teacher in the state. And I think he was actually telling us the truth when he did that. But when the political pressure got so high, and there were tens of thousands of people marching on the Capitol, within a couple of days, all of a sudden he flip-flopped and said, okay, we're going to do a 20% raise. But there's not a sustainable way to pay for that. We have put the state, that decision has put the state budget in a very precarious situation. It reminds me very much of what Janet Napolitano did 10 years ago. As I said, I served as president of the Senate while she was governor for the first 4 years. When I left in 2007, the state budget was balanced. We had eliminated a bunch of all the accounting tricks and gimmicks that both parties had used for decades. We had rebuilt the rainy day fund to over $1 billion. We had cut taxes, but we'd also put more new money into K-12 in a way that could be sustained. I was term limited. We have term limits in Arizona. When I had to leave the legislature in 2007, I was replaced by some more liberal Republicans. The very next year, she convinced them that we could increase spending by $1 billion the very next year in 2008. Unfortunately, that happened the year that the recession hit. And so in a matter of a few months, the state budget was completely out of balance. They wiped out the over $1 billion that I had left in the state rainy day fund the year before and put the state in the biggest financial crisis that we've known in the history of the state. So I'm very concerned that the budget that was just passed by Governor Ducey in the legislature puts us at that same risk. One of the I mentioned the tax increase on vehicle license taxes. They said they raised the vehicle license taxes to pay for the Department of Public Safety, our highway patrol system, but they raised it more than that so that they could skim off some other money and help pay for these teacher salaries. Yes?
Yeah, exactly.
And I know the Stads had to, is it Stad?
Stop.
Stop, I'm sorry. Thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and
Run into the airport.
run to the airport, be safe there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Ken, what exactly acts of, Trump to do hoops backwards and everything else, did the governor do to pay for this 20% increase really possible? How are they doing this? What exactly? I don't subscribe to those in the public as well.
Well, basically they're saying that because we had a couple of good months when the tax collections came in a little higher than expected in December and January, that's just going to happen forever. And they're counting on some higher than previously expected revenues to pay for this going forward. They're using all kinds of transfers of one-time money. They're using over $150 million of transfers for money that's supposed to be spent on other things. They increased the vehicle license taxes, as I mentioned, and they're shifting some of that money over. They also did a thing with hospital assessment rates. They increased the assessment on hospitals in Arizona by about $55 million. By doing that, it draws down more federal funds. By drawing down more federal funds, it frees up some other state monies that were being used for medical programs, and now they're using some of that money to pay for the teacher raises. But we have other state employees who haven't had an increase in their salaries in over a decade. So, and the governor was telling us just last year that any new money that was going to be put into our K-12 education system should be based on some type of a merit or performance-based system, so that the people that are doing a better job are getting a little more of a pay increase than others. We also have huge disparities between what some districts have and what other districts. If you were watching some of the statistics during the whole teacher salary debate, some of our schools, we have 227 school districts in Arizona. Some of our school districts, their average teacher salary is over $60,000 a year. In other school districts, their average is $31,000 a year. So if we're going to put large amounts of new money into our K-12 school system, I believe that those that are below the average should get $3 or $4 for every $1 or $2 that districts that are already above the average, so that we can start to close that gap. We will never take from the haves to give to the have-nots, but any new money should go in. So they're also doing, they're using some accounting tricks, such as things that we really have to pay for every year. They're calling those one-time, so they can put those on a different part on the balance sheet and make it look like those are one-time expenses, and yet we have to do, like, maintaining our school buildings and things like that. So it's a little hard, and you get into a lot of details to try to explain it, but basically they're using all kinds of accounting tricks and gimmicks and hoping that the high revenues that came in from state taxes in December and January are just going to keep happening for the next 2 or 3 years. Yes? Susan? Okay.
Yes, 2 comments on the schools. The superintendents are the ones that control the distribution of money in the school districts. Unless you earmark the money, it's not doing any damn good.
That's true. And the governor and the legislature, by doing what they did, put the state in a almost very precarious situation of giving people the impression that it's the governor and the legislature that give teacher raises. The governor and the legislature do not give teacher raises. They appropriate money to the schools and the school districts, but it's the school boards that make those decisions down at the individual level. Some districts are giving the 10%, or some are even giving more, which means that they already had money somewhere else. One of the things that we need to be doing is looking at how to spend the money that we already are spending more efficiently. We have 60 of the 227 school districts we have in Arizona. 60 of those districts only have 1 school in the whole school district, and yet they have superintendents and all, a lot of the same or bureaucracy. And so we need to be looking at how we can use the money that's already in our schools and in healthcare, wherever it is, more efficiently. And you're right, that it's the school boards that really decide what the pay scales are going to be in that individual school district. You had a second question?
The other thing is, I live in Glendale, and they've been very proactive, with school security. They put officers in all the schools when we have the school shootings. And that's really cut down on, for instance, Apollo, which always has a reputation for being snarky. It calmed down that situation right away.
Good.
So I think that would be a very proactive approach, is to put officers in schools.
I agree, but one of the nice things about this FASTER program out of Ohio is that it's a nonprofit corporation that does this training for free, and so we don't have to spend as much money as we would have to if we were going to put uniformed police officers or more, or several of them in each of the schools. Back here, is it Joe?
Yes, oh wow, I'm impressed, thank you. I'd like to get your thoughts on a couple of issues as a governor you'd be involved with.
Okay.
First would be a convention of states, and the second would be national popular vote to combat the vote.
Okay.
So those two.
Let me do the second one first, the national popular vote. I do not support the national popular vote. I believe that the Electoral College, as set up by the Constitution, works well to give the number of votes for president based on the same representation that each state has in both the Senate and the House. And I think that was a very important compromise that allowed the Constitution to be adopted in the first place. You know, the fundamental disagreement that the 13 colonies had was whether to base Congress on equal representation per state or based on population. And if you had tried to do it one way or the other, it would have never been agreed to. But what they did is they agreed to say, okay, each state gets 2 senators in the Senate, but the House is going to be based on population. So you have kind of a combination of equal representation and population, and the Electoral College basically reflects that same thing. If you go to a national popular vote, then just 1 or 2 states could make the whole decision as to who our president is. Hillary Clinton lost the Electoral College, but she won the popular vote. I think she won the popular vote nationwide by 3 million votes over Trump. But she won California alone by 4 million. So that means that just 1 state would have decided who the president was. Yes?
There's 3,200 counties in the United States. Hillary Clinton won 57. 57 out of 3,200. And she only won 2 counties in New York. Only 2 counties in New York. And yet she carried New York by 1.5 million votes.
Now, on your second question, or actually it was your first question, I am very concerned, and at this point would not support a convention of the states because I'm afraid that it would kind of get out of control and go into things that are not what we need to, we'd have unintended consequences. Yes, sir. Was it Pat?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for making the effort to be here. Mr. Bennett, it seems that today virtually every GOP candidate from any office in America claims that they're a fiscal conservative and they're also a law and order conservative. I think scientists have proven that it's basically impossible to be a fiscal conservative and a law and order conservative because locking up innocent people is very, very expensive. So my first question is, where do you stand on the war on drugs, on all drugs? And my second question is, where do you stand on closing or not closing the gun show and private sale loophole?
Okay, let's do your second one first. I don't consider the ability for a person to sell another person a weapon between a private individual and a private individual. I don't consider that a loophole. I believe that that is a fundamental right. I do support the background checks that happen when people are buying guns from businesses that engage in that business. But I don't consider the private sale of a gun to another person as a loophole. I just consider it a private right that we have the opportunity to keep and bear arms, and if we want to sell an arm to another private individual. The war on drugs, I don't believe that we should legalize recreational marijuana. I do think that we can do a better job of dealing with people who commit crimes that might not require them to be in prison at high cost with other types of ankle bracelets or home arrest or things like that that do not cost us as much as putting those kinds of people in prison. So I would support some judicial reform and things like that, but I'm not a legalizing of all drugs.
Well, sir, in your introduction, you said that you are a small government conservative with libertarian leanings, and the statement that you just made flies in the face of that claim. How do you justify that, sir?
Well, with all due respect, I don't believe that position flies in the face of trying to have as limited government as possible, but I don't believe that we extend that to legalizing all drugs and just abandoning the principles of making sure that we protect society by making sure that the use of dangerous drugs is not rampant. So
you're in favor of limited government, except in those situations where the limited government would allow people to do things that you don't like? Is that what you're saying?
No, he's not saying that.
no, that's not what I'm saying, but
He's saying follow the law.
we'll always have disagreements. And that's
Follow the law. One time the law said that freeing slaves was
And we worked through those, and that's why we have a republic. We don't have a democracy. We have a republic, and we elect representatives at the local level. I started on a city council, as you saw, and we elect people to represent us in the state legislature or in Congress or whatever. So all of those issues get worked through as we elect our representatives to pass laws. I'm just telling you where I am as to where I come down on this law or that. Yes?
When you signed the Medicaid bill at midnight, is there anything that we could reverse it?
When Jan Brewer signed the Medicaid bill at midnight.
Yeah.
Yes, I do not support the expansion of...
What is happening with it to this day?
Well, we were told by Governor Ducey that he was going to reduce the Medicaid expansion taxes as close to zero, and they've actually gone up. So we're actually still going in the wrong direction, in my opinion.
Are they going to illegal aliens or benefiting from this action also?
Some of our government programs, even though they're not supposed to be used by illegals that are in our country, obviously are being used. There are federal laws related to health care that require hospitals to take care of somebody when they come in, whether they're here legally or not.
Okay,
And
because
so,
once you cut it off the beneficiary that we pay our taxes to, they go self-deport.
Right.
And they have to.
I think one of the biggest problems we have in our country is that we have too much of a welfare state, and that welfare state is part of what draws people here, who knows that if they can get on those programs, rightfully or wrongly, that they'll be in a much better position than wherever they came from. And so we need to reduce the welfare state and make sure that it's not being used by anybody that doesn't have to, and not used at all by people who are not here legally. Back to Susan and then Archie.
Yes, one benefit of legalizing most drugs would be to get the drug cartels out of it and also reduce the prison population.
Thank you.
We have more people in prison per capita than any other country in the world. So prison is big business in this country.
And I'd like to see some judicial reform so that we can reverse that trend. Archie and then this gentleman.
State of Arizona has huge unfunded liabilities.
Unfunded liabilities.
Yes, homeowners could indicate in 2011 that unfunded liability in the state of Arizona was in excess of $66 billion. Almost all of the pension funds of public employees in this country are funded. What do you consider to be the two largest problems facing the state of Arizona, and what would you do to correct them?
The two largest problems that I believe that we have in the state of Arizona, we started talking about the pension funds. The largest problem is that we're not being honest with our people about whether our budgets are balanced and addressing issues such as that. I started off by saying that we've been told for the last 4 years that our budgets are balanced, and yet if you look at the total debt of the state of Arizona, it's gone up by $1 billion. Yes, a big portion of that is the unfunded liabilities in our pension system. We need to be making a payment sufficient each year to be reducing that unfunded liability, not allowing it to grow like they've been doing for the last almost a decade. When I was in the state senate, our public employee pensions were funded at or above 100%. Some of them now are down in the 30s and 40%. And so we need to, now some of that was because of stock market corrections and crashes and things like that. But we need to be, the biggest problem is we need to be honest with our budgeting to reflect what our real liabilities are and paying those liabilities on an ongoing every year basis instead of letting them grow and shifting them on to the next generation.
At some point, we're going to have to raise taxes to fund the pension funds, unless we do something to the income.
Well, one of the ways that we can help the pension fund is being more efficient with the monies that we're already spending in government. We've got lots of state agencies that employ people that are in the pension funds. For example, you take the correctional officers that work in our state prisons. Most of our state prisons have a 30 to 40% fewer officers than they need to run the prison in a safe manner based on accepted standards. If we can save money in other parts of government so that we can fund the number of officers that it really takes to run the prisons, then we have more people paying into the prison pension fund, the correctional officers pension fund. So when we have too few police officers or highway patrol is down from where they should be, that creates part of the deficit in the pension fund. And so we need to be more efficient as to how we use every state dollar so that we are keeping the public safe, but also paying enough people that work in those systems so that they can pay into their own retirement system. But you're right, we can't continue to do what we're doing and let that problem get worse and worse. So the first thing I would do would be honest budgeting. The second thing I would say to Arizona's is everything related to safety. That's securing the border and school safety and all the kinds of things that we've kind of alluded to related to keeping the public safe. Yes?
Yes, Ken, thank you for coming. I had a few questions. I'm a native Arizonan. I can remember when the sales tax in the state was 4%, and I-17 back then had 4 lanes. We have 50 times the people, double the sales tax, and it's still 4 lanes. So my 2 questions are, basically, what I've seen is what that really is that the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto have been kind of slowly incorporated into American life. And so my 2 questions are, what do you think of Ken Bennett as the Supreme Court nominee? And 2, I'm concerned about the surveillance state. On that same road, we have cameras violating our Arizona right to privacy constantly. And it's not American.
Okay, well, Clint Bolick is on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And I supported his nomination. I think he was a good appointment to the court.
Yeah. Slow down the social.
Yeah. One of the problems with our transportation infrastructure, you mentioned about how many more people we have, and I-17 is still 4 lanes. In the last 10 years, in order to balance the state budget, they have robbed money from the Highway User Revenue Funds. It's called HERF. They robbed took almost $1 billion out of the highway revenue funds that are supposed to go to maintain our roads and our streets in order to balance other parts of the state budget. These are the accounting gimmicks that I was talking about. When I was Senate President, we had eliminated all of those accounting tricks and gimmicks. All of the highway user funds were going to the maintenance and building of new highways. If we had not robbed $1 billion over the last 10 years, then we could have looked at alternative freeways or highway systems or widening the ones that we have. I would like to see us take a proactive approach whenever we have infrastructure needs. If we've got a roadway that needs to be 6 lanes instead of 4, I think we ought to, when we rebuild it, we ought to build it to 8. Because the incremental cost of putting 2 more lanes in right now is way lower than what it would take is if we just add 1 more lane on each side, you go from 4 to 6, then 10 years later, you've got to go from 6 to 8. Whenever we need to do infrastructure improvements, we need to do a little bit more than what's necessary today because it'll save money down the road.
Ken, are you aware that the Arizona State Constitution, Article 7, Clause 18, or something like that, has a 2 6-year term limit for the United States Senators and a 3-year term limit for the U.S. House? Nobody's enforcing that. How do you feel about that?
Well, term limits, there was a group that tried to do term limits across the country years ago. And the way they did it is they went to some states and they got an amendment to those states' constitutions to put term limits in. The federal, in order to sell that idea, they also put term limits on the state people, the governors and the legislators and things like that. So they were trying to really put term limits on our federal representatives. And then the federal court system came in and said that it's unconstitutional to do that on a state-by-state basis because Congress works on such a seniority system that if some states have term limits on their federal representatives, senators, and congresspersons, then that disadvantages them to other states. So yes, the people of Arizona approved term limits on our federal and our state representatives, but the U.S. courts threw the federal limit out.
So the courts are making the limit, so.
Yeah, which I don't agree with. Yeah.
There's kind of a little bit of a correction on that. There's two provisions in the Arizona State Constitution. The one for the House and the Senate, this one Archie pointed this one out to me. It does not say they can't run for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 terms. It just says in there that their name shall not appear on the ballot. Okay, on the general election ballot, it says their name shall not appear on it. That does not preclude them from running as a write-in. Write-ins do win. The Murkowski one is a write-in. There's several of them that run as a write-in. So essentially, that's the name. That's not your job. As Secretary of State, you should not have allowed a member of the House of Representatives to have his name on the ballot for the 4th term. Now, he can run as a write-in. And the same thing is true about the Senate. I don't think that's in your, although you can instruct the Senate, no, you can't, because you need the Secretary of State. You can't tell the Secretary of State what to do. But that's the difference between the federal and the state. But it should be enforced. I don't think that's ever.
I'm just trying to respond to kind of the overall of how did we end up with a kind of a term limit.
Because when I read the comments last year against State Schweik, he was going for his 4th term, and I went down to the Secretary of State, and they said, no, we don't, you have to go to the Attorney General. I went to the Attorney General, no, we have to go to the governor's office, no, we have to go back to the Secretary of State. It was just a big runaround, and nobody really wanted to touch this.
Okay. Thank you.
This is right.
Okay, good. All right. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to follow up on the last thing. Along that road I just drove, there's all these surveillance
All the
states.
surveillance stuff.
The state is aiding and abetting the federal surveillance state. It's not American, it's not the fourth, it's not privacy.
Well, I haven't thought too much of that specifically, but I appreciate you bringing that up because I do think we have a right to privacy in the United States that should not be violated. And if that's gone too far, then we need to be thinking about that. Thank you for bringing that. Joe?
Along those same lines, though, I guess we can summarize it like this. Edward Snowden, hero or traitor?
Yes.
What are your thoughts? I mean, you don't have to make.
Well, let's ask questions about Ken Bennett.
I haven't spent a lot of time studying the Edward Snowden case, so this is Christine with my campaign. I do want to, before we get too far, I'm running under what's called the clean election system. Instead of taking large contributions from special interest groups in or out of the state or whatever, I agree not to do that and instead accept $5 contributions from ordinary Arizonans like me. Those contributions get turned into the clean election system. The clean elections program then provides almost $900,000 for us to run a campaign in the Republican primary. And if I win the primary, then they provide more in the general. But on some of the tables around you, and some of you have already filled them out and given to me, and I thank you very much for that. But if you see a sheet like this, these are the $5 contribution forms. We need many, many more in the next week or 10 days to run for governor and get the funding for running for governor. You have to turn in 4,000 of these. We're well on our way, but we need quite a few more of these. So if you haven't done one personally and have an extra $5 that you can put in, I would be very appreciative. Even more important though, I need you to take 5 or 10 yourself and get your spouse, your neighbors, your friends, family, whoever it is to do $5. You can mail them to the address at the bottom of the form. So, by the way, the clean elections money does not come from the general fund where other parts of the state government are funded. The clean elections program is passed by the voters of Arizona. It receives its funding primarily from surcharges on criminal fines. So when somebody does something that's considered a crime and has to pay a fine or a penalty, there's a surcharge on that, and that's where the clean elections gets their funding to help candidates like me. So many of you have given me your $5 form today. Thank you for that. Please take 4 or 5 more, and we're trying to really push and get the last 1,000 or so that we need in the next week or 10 days. Anna, did you have a question? Why don't you use that so we can hear you?
Access are not going to go out. Well, is,
Our taxes are going.
it says here clearly, if you said the Broadway, the broader tax base, sales tax requires tax on goods and services. So now you're saying here also, let me see, I'm sorry, my voice is not working. It says here that we have about a 10% recession, Bennett said. And total personal income went down to 10%. And what you're planning to do here is it can be sold by broadening the state sales tax, requiring tax on goods and services that are now exempt. In other words, you're not raising taxes, you're not planning on raising taxes, but you're planning on taxing other things that are not being taxed right now.
Wow.
All I was saying to that reporter, she misrepresented it, in my opinion, in that article. But I'm not for increasing taxes, but I am for looking at how could we reform our tax code so that we have a lower rate, we don't collect maybe on more transactions. So we collect the same amount, not a tax increase, but we collect the same amount so that our revenue flows with the economic cycles instead of going too high in the good years and too low in the bad years. So I do not support increasing taxes.
No. It doesn't say that here that you're increasing taxes. It said that you're looking for items or things that are not having to pay tax at this time, so that you
So
can
if we lower the rate, if we lower, for example, whenever possible, I think we should be reducing income taxes. Because only Arizonans just lost everything. Let me just say, Anna, I do not support increasing taxes. If we reformed our taxes so that we have lower rates and a broader base and collected the same amount of money, then that would, thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't even, my voice is not helping me. We are under the belief that you are planning to tax other items that have not been taxed in the past, because that's what the writing says.
I would look at how we could restructure our tax system, lower the rate, broaden the base, collect the same amount of money. That's not a tax increase. That's just collecting the same amount of money in a little different way. I believe that it's better for Arizonans if we have lower income taxes and a broader sales tax, because tourists and visitors, illegals, they help pay sales taxes. They don't pay income taxes. Only Arizonans pay income taxes. So I'm not talking about increasing the total amount of taxes that is collected, but I'm always looking for ways to make our tax system work better for Arizonans so that visitors, tourists, illegals, and others can pay more of their fair share.
I don't think that illegals pay their fair share.
I agree.
Definitely not. They pay more than what they.
I agree. Yes. Is it less?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a provision in the Arizona State Constitution that says public money shall not be used for private use. Something like you're probably familiar with that.
Yes.
Provision. The Republican Party is a private organization. The Democrat Party is a private organization. Why is public money paying for primaries? Why is public money paying for, especially for the primaries?
I think the fundamental answer is because the legislatures have agreed to appropriate money to pay for those two primaries, or all the primaries. It was,
They don't have the authority to do that. But it's pretty clear.
they do so because the legislature has appropriated money to do so.
Can they appropriate some to ferry or some to...
Well, they have a system where, you know, if you're a libertarian, the Libertarian Party is recognized sometime, yeah. If they have representation and they have a primary, then they get pay for their primary. The Greens have had a primary at times, if they qualify for it.
Is that fixable, is that correct?
Yes.
So is that just one of those things that we have to live with?
No, it's fixable by legislation.
But shouldn't they be prohibited from doing it by the Constitution? I mean,
I'm Christine, I'm his campaign manager, I just want to make a couple announcements, Ken, really quick. If you guys want to go online, you can follow him on Twitter if you do Twitter. We didn't have enough copies of it today, but we do have on Facebook and on his webpage, we do have tweets from John McCain and Doug Ducey, and we also now have a video, and it was the press conference McCain did when he went out there, and he had Lindsey Graham on one side saying, "I trust my governor," and we clipped it for some of the parts, but the whole thing was he was saying, you know, I'm supporting repealing Obamacare with further Arizona, and my governor said so.
Where can I find that video? Is that
It's on our website,
Ken Bennett.
and there is a pure press release. We also have copies of Ken's school safety plan that doesn't seize guns. And right now today, the Walk for Your Life, what is that?
March for Your Life.
The March for Your Life, or whatever, the group gun group, they're at the Capitol again, marching. And I believe, if it wasn't for Ken running, Juicy's already promised a special session to bring through his STOP program, which does, I went and read it in detail, and it really does. It creates this whole system where, say somebody in your family is accused of having being violent to go to school, you will end up paying, guess what? Lawyer fees and psychology examinations. That was no way to fix it, to make it good for the gun people, right? So the gun people would agree to it, basically saying now you get to pay all these attorney fees. So there's all, when they talk about these levels and layers of protection, what that means is attorney fee for some individual. And what bothers me about it is, if there really is a person who's disturbed, you're not getting help. Everybody's making money, but no one's getting help. So anyway, they are marching today. That is a statewide. Also, there was a state this week that actually passed the plan exactly like Ducey's. There's 12 states who are behind this. This is not a grassroots movement. This is a movement to take away your guns. And the other state passed exactly. That's what Ducey wanted to be the first one. In his op-ed he just wrote on Arizona Central when he launched his campaign, one of his campaign promises, he wants to be reelected, is so he can do his STOP program. So you guys, this is really, really an important election, so we really need your help to get 5. Go online, look at that stuff, and we're going to be doing the border announcements soon, so it's kenbennett.com, take a little card, and help us get some 5. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. Well, thank you all. Do we have any other questions? Or yes?
I have a comment. School safety, the only way that you could do it is remove all those no guns allowed, take them off the door, every door. So this way, that means, if you're a responsible gun, you can't go into the building.
Right.
Because otherwise you can't get it.
I believe it's foolish to try to establish a gun-free zone because our criminals will never obey
I know, take those signs.
a sign that says, this is a gun-free. Imagine that. So I believe our schools should be as secure as our post offices or banks or sporting events or concerts or whatever it is. And so my school safety program allows, through the use of a FASTER program, like I mentioned, willing, capable, and competent school personnel to carry guns and have them ready to protect our students in case of a worst-case scenario, a live shooter. Thank you. All righty. Thank you very much. I appreciate your allowing me to be here. Thank you for your questions. Good luck with me afterwards. Please help me with the $5 contributions if you can.
Thank you very much. It's Frank. Frank's going to have our drawing. Anna's going to talk here for a minute first. She should work fine. Just a little about here.
citizen because of my own wish to be here and legally here and be a citizen. I have been a citizen for, I'm not going to tell you how long because then I'll give away my age. But I have been a citizen for a long, long time. I came here when I was 19 years old. I had graduated from nursing school in Mexico. And they were hiring nurses for the Vietnam War. A lot of our nurses here were going to Vietnam. So I was one of the recruits that they went and recruited us right out of the nursing school. I came here, I was only going to be here a year and go home. But I ended up getting married. And so I couldn't go back home. I have 4 children. The oldest one is a CPA. The second one is an attorney. She's a judge now, Superior Court judge. The third one is an engineer. And the fourth one is a medical doctor. So I did my job. Okay. I thank this country for all the wonderful gifts that I have had from it. I didn't come here to thank, I came here to give. But I have been given so much that I think I need to return it in some way. And my voice is not working today. But I can tell you that it angers me to no end to see people coming here illegally, going straight to the welfare office, because my mother raised 6 of us. My father died when I was very young, and she raised all of us. She worked, she was divorced, and she worked to support us. We never went to ask anybody for any help. And this was a single woman in Mexico. Everybody in my family had businesses because they all had an ambition to work and do something. People here come here, the worst of the worst come here because they cannot make it over there. And they come here because here they figure that they will make it with the free things that they get. Free food, free rent, free medical, everything is free for them. I worked here as a nurse and I saw how much money it costs us to have people that come here illegally. They don't have insurance, and your insurance and mine pays for them. They don't pay taxes because they don't report their income. Many of them make money as they toll it underground or whatever other name they have, but they don't pay taxes with that money. I was a nurse, and then when I came here, I went to college back again and became a teacher. So I was a high school teacher here, and I raised my children, but I was still going to school, and ended up working as a teacher. I saw so much abuse of the system. They don't pay anything. They get all their books free. Even uniforms for sports are free. And I'm not offended when I say illegal alien. I don't think it offends people because that's exactly what they are. They're foreigners. They are here illegally. It's not a bad word. It's the correct name for them. People say, don't call them illegal aliens. They are. If they were here legally, I would say immigrants. They're not here legally. And the thing is that every one of us are supporting all those people and the many children that they have. And what hurts the most is that their children, the majority of them, do not grow up. There are some, not the majority of them, do not grow up to be Americans. They do not have the pride in being a citizen of this country. They do not appreciate this country. I hear so much. As a teacher, I heard, because I had students that came from Mexico, and they have here, and like I said, everything was free for them. And I made sure that I was teaching English. And believe it or not, I can speak English. And right now, my voice is not working, not even for Spanish or English or any other language. I have traveled all over Europe, and I have learned a little bit of the language of friends in Italy and places that I have visited. But right now, I cannot even speak my name. So I apologize for that. Ken, a lot of these people come here only to be given, not to give. They do not they do not even give loyalty to this country, and that angers me to no end. I gave up teaching because I had too many students, too many teenagers. I was teaching juniors and seniors, and I was disgusted to see what they did in this country. They take everything they can and get, oh, this is not my country. They don't want to stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance. A lot of them keep saying, oh, they're going to go back to Mexico. Sure, they go back over there and they come right back. I think we need people that come here legally, that enter through the front door. I had to go through, I was a nurse and they invited me to come, and I still had to produce a lot of documents. There's a recommendation, my credentials of being a nurse, a graduate nurse already, and all of that had to be produced. It took 3 months to clear everything. My health at that time was excellent, so I was able to come in right away. And I did work here as a nurse during the Vietnam War. After I got married, it took a while before I stopped working and started having babies. As I said, all those babies grew up, and they're very productive, very, very useful people that everybody can be proud of. And I cannot stand the thought of seeing all these teenagers coming from Mexico to go to school here and go out thinking that they don't know this country anything, not even a little bit of loyalty, nothing like that. It's just something that I don't want to see anymore. And I'm sorry that I'm going to so long with this, but there's so much more. I'm writing a book, as a matter of fact, and that book will be out someday. I don't know when. Okay? There's another person here who is also a person born in another country who happens to be one of the best citizens. He's out there in the legislature finding out everything that's going on and putting it out in his letters for all of us to read and know the laws that are being passed and the ones that need to be voted on. And I don't know if he wants me to tell his name. Maybe some of you know who he is. Yes. Can I say your name? Jose Borrero, right there. A Cuban-born man who came here also to do nothing but good. And I'm so happy for him, and I'm grateful to be his friend. Thank you all very much for putting up with me.
Thanks very much.
I want to ask Ken.
Yes?
Ken Bennett.
Oh, wow.
How firm are you on the wall? And would you sign an affidavit?
Absolutely.
No, I mean really, DACA. How are you on DACA?
I do not. I think DACA is basically a lie.
Yes.
By just telling people that we're just going to delay your removal, when I don't think.
I just want to make sure you're not a rhino.
I support the law, and if I do not support amnesty. If you're here illegally, whether you came or someone brought you, you should not be allowed to get in front of the line and get preferential treatment. If you want to get in the back of the line and do it the way that everybody is supposed to do it, fine. But there's not be any amnesty.
And with the money that goes to DC, what do you think your chances are?
Well, 4 years ago, this is a very good question. 4 years ago, there were 7 people running in the Republican primary. Ducey only got about a third of the vote in the primary, but the other 2/3 was divided among 6 others. This time there's only 2. And there were polls released just last week that says he is still well below 50% of people who believe he should be.
He's getting 31%.
26% in general.
27 or 31% favoring, 69%.
A majority of the general electorate and a majority of even Republicans in the primary are looking for somebody else. This time there's only going to be 2. I think our chances are very good.
I hate to get off the topic, but what about our Carlos stopping getting out or Kelly getting out?
We're not talking about other
I know.
candidates. No, he's not. I'm sorry, I'm not letting him answer that. He is not going to talk about other candidates.
I'm running for governor, and I'm not going to comment on other races. Ruby brought up something interesting on Monday night, a couple of weeks ago at one of the meetings. And she said, you know, you don't need a passport to get out of our country. You don't need a passport to go to Mexico. You can go to Mexico without a passport. You go to Canada without a passport. But you can't get in without one. You can't get back in our country without one. And yet we've got all these people coming over without a passport. But
So if you're a U.S. citizen,
you can't, if you go to Nogales, Sonora, you can't get back to Nogales, Mexico, Nogales, Arizona, without a passport. But yet they're flooding over the border. These people, and bless their heart, I don't blame them at all.
well, even if you look at the immigration policies of Mexico and these other Central American countries, they are being totally hypocritical based on how and who they allow in their country, and yet they want us to just have open borders and let anybody in.
And it's not,
That's not.
nobody in this room had anything to do with the separating of the children from their parents. Only the parents had something to do with it.
Yes.
No one else in this room did. I did, you did, Matt did, Susan did. Nobody else did. The only person responsible for separating the children from the parents are the parents themselves.
And they're doing so.
People that brought them.
Yeah.
You guys bring up a little hot spot for me. I never hear, how much have we invested in some of these DACA kids? Did they graduate from our high schools? Have they gone to our colleges? Have they spent time in the military? How much do we have? Are we going to waste that investment that we have in those kids by sending them out to someplace way beyond the border?
They can go back to their own country and make credit because they're all educated. They're all valedictorians. Every DACA kid here is a valedictorian. Michael said it is. They're all valedictorians. They're all perfect. They all walk on water. There's none of them are bad. One of them is bad.
We're practical about this.
No, I know what you're saying, is that if these are the best and the brightest, and we educate them, well, then they should be very successful back wherever they go.
Well, we lose all that we paid for.
We gain a better ally.
It's cheaper if they're back where they started.
All right, there's arguments from both sides. One more question and I'm going to do the kid, and then you guys got to go home. Yeah. Let's go.
Yeah, well, I think the gal from Kenya yesterday was scaled the Statue of Liberty and just ripped us up as being a bunch of racists. That is
She told us.
Let's do the book here. Yeah. For you new folks, this is going for the book. You have your tickets out.
Okay.
The first person a chance, I gotta put my glasses
Why?
on. 2817. 2817. There we go. 2808.
2808?
Yeah.
Right on.
Oh, okay. While you're there, drawing over out of the hat over that.
Speedy Dog.
2825. 2825. 2814. 14. 2814. Hey. Today, if that or somebody drawn over out of the hat for? This doesn't do it, we'll give up. 2818.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. Did we have fun today?
Yeah.
Yay! All right.
I got a question though, another one for Ken. Ken Bennett. Oh,
got free speech zones.
That's where you shouldn't have to put up signs.